I'm going to talk mostly today about a show I've been doing for the last few years called ArtBots, the robot talent show. I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about how I got to wanting to do a show like that. I started out in music, like I think a lot of people here, and for music, went into software and started learning how to program and writing my own software and things like that. After a while, I wasn't really satisfied with just making software and with being on a screen, especially coming from a performing background, with using instruments and using my hands and using my body and really being fully engaged in what I was doing on a stage. And that sort of led me to get into hardware and learning electronics and learning circuit design and things like that. And from there, it was sort of another step towards working in robotics. One of the things that I think is most interesting, as I give you this little introduction, actually, I'm going to play you a video from the first. This is a video we made from the first show, which was in 2002. Some of the things that interest me about all this are things that have come up a number of times so far during these presentations. I'm sorry, I've been so busy doing everything else, I'm not paying attention here. Okay, one of the things that interests me most about all of this is that when you're writing software, and we've had a number of presentations that involve random elements, and there was a little bit of a discussion earlier today about why use random elements and things like that, particularly in the RAND radio. In your everyday life, in the real world, you have a tremendous amount of chaos, and you're already sort of spending all your energy to stop things from being out of control. And it seems like the world has all of this tremendous variability and all of this tremendous potential that when you get really deeply in the software, at a certain point, you start thinking, boy, I wish I had, some variability. I wish I didn't know what this thing was going to do. I'm going to write a genetic algorithm or do an L system or something, and you're always sort of searching for these ways to spice things up. For me, that was one of the things that really pushed me into ways of combining these more conceptual ideas I was interested in software, but having the manifestation of them be in the physical world, because that way you sort of get all of that stuff for free. It's just there. You could fight really hard against it if you wanted to. And if you look at modern consumer electronics equipment, they have a tremendous amount of energy into sort of removing the influence of the real world, of making sure the pixels are uniform and making sure register at the right point and all that. But if you don't do that, there's sort of this tremendous and in a way untapped amount of exactly what a lot of people seem to look for when they're writing software. And for me, getting into robotics has been an interesting way to think about it. One piece that really propelled me along these lines is something called Crash and Bloom that I did several years ago, and it's a series of little boxes. There's 42 of them, and they all connect one to the other. And this isn't a robotic piece, but it's a piece that I ended up thinking a lot about the phrase 100 is too many, because when I first imagined this piece, it was all about these little boxes all connect into each other and they send a little ping, I call it, from one to the other. And you can make these complicated topologies by connecting them, and it's called Crash and Bloom because some of you may know, say, algae in a lake, or really any an entity in an environment. It uses resources and it'll reproduce, and some of them don't know how to stop reproducing, so they use up, the algae will grow and grow and grow and take all the oxygen in the lake, and at a certain point there's no more oxygen and it can't sustain the algae bloom, it's called, and so it dies, and that's a crash. And usually some algae survives, and once the lake recovers, it blooms again. So it's this cycle that happens. Well, that's what happens with these boxes, and I'm not going to go into it, but you inject one little thing into this system, and it sort of propagates through this network. It's in the dark because they light up. And it's also, You can't hear them very well. It's a bit like frogs or something. Anyway, my point with all this is that originally I wanted 100 of these things, and I started building them. It's a little circuit that I designed, and it was very nearly possible for me to make 100 of them by hand. I had friends helping me, and it was just because I had cutting the boxes and clipping all the wires and mounting the components and all this stuff, and I ended up with 42 of them, which was just enough to get it to start doing something interesting. And later, of course, this is the kind of thing that if you were doing it in software, it'd be kind of trivial. You would write this thing as a little object, and you would say, okay, I can plug them into each other. Now give me 10,000 of them, and it's done. It doesn't. You could do is give me 1,000,000, and maybe you have to wait 5 minutes for the outcome. But really, there's very little bounds on what you can do. Whereas in the real world, there was this tremendous bound on what I could do. And the result, I think, is very interesting, which is that if what I was really after was sort of taking this system and exploring it and getting a result that I could analyze and would make sense and would really tell me something about these kind of systems, this would be very, very, if I were doing science, then I would be a very bad scientist if I were doing it this way. But I'm not doing science. And instead, what comes out of this is this really wonderful experience that is sort of much more driven by the concept of connecting these things and the concept of the resource. And you sort of very, very viscerally experience that, and you're in a room, and it matters how close you are to the things. And if you back up far enough, it becomes almost an airport where you see the lights going down the runways, and because unfortunately you can't really see it very well in the video, but you'll see, a ping moving around some of these circuits and things like that. That's all I'm going to say about that. If anybody's interested, I can tell you more about that later. Anyway, so for me, that's been my path into almost all of my work now is physical robotics, things that move, things that sort of have an idea that push them, and then the really interesting part is the struggle to make that thing actually work in the physical world, because it's usually that hard to make it work in the world of the screen. So we've done the show for 3 years now. We do an open call. This is where I'm going to play you the other video. So this I'll give this background. Just some video from the first year we did the show. It was pretty small. There were just 10 pieces in it. A few years ago, some of you in States anyway, and I think in lots of other parts of the world, there was suddenly a tremendous amount of interest in robotics, and most of it was focused on these battle type shows. Were they in Europe as well, where the robots are driving and you put a saw and you try to crash it and cut things in half and blow things up, and it was this very manly, very competitive thing, and at the same time the Mars rovers were in the news, and there was a lot of attention on this kind of robotics technology that was focused towards what I felt was just a very sort of aggressive way of thinking about using machines. I mean, a lot of people here have talked about, have done projects that are all about sort of repurposing things that were maybe meant for something else. And I knew and know that there are lots of people around the world using robotics technology, all sorts of wonderful things. And so the real impetus for the show was to say, this is great, BattleBots is, the top-rated TV show, and let's get all these people that are watching BattleBots and have a really positive sort of celebration of the fact that the exact same technologies are being used by artists for all these wonderful things. So we send out open calls, and first year we had 10 people in the show, last year we had about 20, and this year we have 20 again, and we get hundreds of people from around the world sending things in. And then mostly it's a practical matter what we pick, whether the pieces can come to New York. We don't really have any money, so kind of, it's not so much we call it a talent show because that's kind of a funny way of thinking about the fact that robots are doing things. But it's called a talent show in reference to all those competitions, all the hammering and all that. Really, it's just an art show. And another one of the goals was in calling it a talent show was to really reach, and it's also a goal with Dorkbot, and I think one of the reasons why it's worked well in a lot of places, that it's an attempt to reach out to people who don't identify themselves as artists and who aren't really sure of what they're doing and where it fits in, because there's a lot of people making things, writing software, building robots, and thinking exactly the same thing Software Art Conference is thinking about, but they don't even know that world exists. Because I remember very clearly as a kid, and I was talking to Saul the other day, I didn't even really understand that there were artists until maybe I was 17 or 18. It wasn't a part of my life in the way I grew up. And so something like this is we're really making a strong effort to reach out to lots of different kinds of people and invite them to bring work in and present it in this context, even if they think they're doing a science project, for instance. Each year I've asked to curate the show with me, so this is the third year. And that again is an attempt just to have very different viewpoints and different communities be involved in things. And we also, in the call for works, we say if you think a lot and you think it's art, then send it to us. Because, who knows what a robot is. We focused on mostly physical things because, we want it to be a show that people come to and are really physically engaged with. This year is the first time we've had a piece that's a moving physical manifestation. And I'll show you that in a minute. It's a screen-based piece for the first time. And so I have 6 minutes left. I'm just going to quickly go through and show you sort of some of the highlights from the shows over the past 3 years. This is a Japanese brush style called sumi. And it's great. It's interesting listening to the conversation that was taking place after the last presentation about, sort of the question of doing this kind of activist software and who the audience is and really who it's aimed at and whether you're kind of targeting people because they use Windows or something like that. And, those are tough questions. And the approach we've really tried to take is, in a way, that there's a lot of activism that we feel we're doing in doing shows like this, but it's a very sort of under the surface activism in that we're really trying to celebrate. We're trying to say these are the things we think are really great, make them accessible and publicize them and get kids. Tons of schools now, are doing robotics and they have after school programs, and they're all still like the robotics programs are aimed at some interesting things like find the flame and stuff, follow the line, stuff like that. But there's this whole other world that there's absolutely no reason why it couldn't be directed at. And so our efforts are sort of going towards there. So that was the first year. The second year, there's not much time, so I'm going to have to do this pretty quickly, unfortunately. And I'm just going to hit a couple of them. This one was a very beautiful drawing machine that had microphones in the space. This one's whether this is a robot or not is pretty much up in the air. It's kind of like a seismograph, for earthquakes, but he built this beautiful mechanism. It's not computerized, the mechanism, it just happens to want to move in circles. And so the microphone sort of vibrates it, and it moves in circles, and it leaves these beautiful traces. This was a terrific piece that they made like a large photo booth. And you would go into this photo booth and put your dollar in and then stand in front of the video monitor, and when you liked what you saw, it does edge detection on your image. You push the button and it's got a robotic arm with LEDs, and it would open up a piece of Polaroid film and draw on the film, and then you would get, so from the photo booth you would get your Polaroid with your face on it. I really want to show this one. This is, some of you may know Future Farmers, who would do a lot of web work. They're based in San Francisco. Theirs was called Robots Like H2O, and it was this, this cart you can step on, and as you move your feet, you kind of pedal forward in this very inefficient way. And they had 2 plants on it and some water here, and there was a skylight. This isn't this is a different time they installed it, but there's a skylight in front. And their idea was, and also not in this photo, is there was a shade that covered one of the plants. So their idea was that one plant would grow forward towards the light, and it would shift the balance, which would cause the wheels to move, and then the shade would shift over, and it would go down, and the other plant would go forward. And it was sort of going for the water. And you can see very barely in this picture, there's little track marks that we put on the floor to sort of indicate that, if you gave it enough, of several months, maybe it would kind of move a little bit. So I really like, having it open to that sort of very conceptual works that don't really do what they say they do. And finally, there's the show this year, which is coming up in September. We're very excited because the first one was at an art school in Brooklyn. The second one was at a gallery in Chelsea in Manhattan, which is like, Art World Center. But this year we're going up to Harlem, where the studios where I work at are, and we're doing a lot of outreach to the surrounding schools and having a lot of kids come in classes and things like that. So it's going to be a very different environment from the sort of Chelsea art world. This is a very, very strange piece, which is a bionic log. And he makes this sort of fence, and he projects a forest on the back wall, and it has a horrible, horrible way of moving. It can't do it, but it tries very hard. This is a bit like what Lexi was showing earlier, in that you have 2 cameras. You kind of become the cyborg, but you have insect eyes, sort of, in that you have cameras strapped on your wrists, and you see each gets the view from one camera, so you can sort of do this, and you try to navigate the space, but with non-human eyes, so you become a robot of sorts. This is a wonderful project that it's a robot made all out of cardboard, and it actually functions, and what the robot does is it disassembles cardboard boxes, and it sort of puts them on a cardboard conveyor belt, which brings them back around, and it reassembles them, and then it unassembles them, and it just sort of makes this. So it's a cardboard machine that makes cardboard. This is really, really gorgeous. I've been dreaming a long time of doing a sand. I really like plotters, old pen plotters, and thinking about sand plotters, but this guy just did the best one ever. It's this beautiful, very large table full of sand with a marble, and underneath he's got on an arm that can move in 2 dimensions, a magnet. And so it just drags very, very slowly. It drags this ball over the sand, and he does it iteratively. So what you see here has been going on for hours and hours, where it drew the pattern once, and then because it can't really do it the same every time, it goes again, and some of the sand falls off, and it's just gorgeous. This is by some of the folks that do Dorkbot in Ghent. It's these sort of floating robotic balloons that communicate with one another, and they're going to fill up a large space. And let me tell you one more. I also like to work with biological things a lot, with living things, and this is a piece. You've probably heard of the Mars rovers that are on Mars right now and keep going, and they had these drilling arms that were drilling into the rocks and taking samples and things like that. Well, the company that built that is in Manhattan. And the engineers submitted a piece for ArtBots, and the piece, it's kind of ironic in that they're doing this very, very hardcore, actually going to Mars and drilling things. It's this beautiful piece called Wildflower Meadow Glacier, and this is just a small model of it so far. But in Central Park, there's a giant open field of grass called the Sheep's Meadow, and what they propose, this is the size of a glacier, not a real. I mean, a glacier is the size of a whole state, but it's as big as this room, say, and it has this drive system that lets it pull itself across the grass, and as it pulls itself, it tears up the grass behind it, but it's got various environmental sensors on it, and in its wake, it leaves seeds for different flowers in different concentrations corresponding to the CO2 levels and the temperature and things like that. So as it pulls itself across the park, you get this, over time, the flowers grow behind it. So it's kind of like a glacier that tears up what's behind it, but what it leaves is this trail of flowers. So I'm out of time, but that's the artbots.org site. has documentation for all the shows we've done so far. And this one's in September in New York. And I've got 3 minutes for questions if anybody's got any. Any question? Yeah.
This isn't really a critical question. I'm more just curious. A lot of this work is redundant of work we've done 30 years ago.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I don't think it's a problem at all. I think that, I mean, people are still painting portraits and people are still finding new ways of looking at the world and existing in the world. If you went, if there were a colony on Mars and people were still doing the same thing, maybe you could expect this more radical shift. But I don't believe that every new media just adds to what was there before. It's not like when radio came, live music stopped, and so the fact that people are still playing live music and not only doing radiophonic works doesn't mean they're somehow retro or something like that. So I don't think it's a concern. I mean, if you're literally redoing what someone else did, then you'd have to think about it. But there's 6 billion people in the world, and there's plenty of room, I think, for people to really follow what they what they're interested in and what they want to do. I guess I don't see it as an economy where you have to. I try to not be involved as much as I can in any sort of economy of who's doing the new thing right or who's making the biggest mark and who's getting ahead in the. It's like, if I can have a show where a bunch of kids come to it and get all jacked up about flowers in Central Park, then I'm way happier than if someone did a radical thing that put the art world on its side of its head. Because, I mean, ultimately, I just don't care. I walk by my park every day, and I don't. That's the life.
Actually, if I could just jump in on that, I mean, I believe the head of the foundation in Amsterdam that gives all the money to artists actually wrote an article about the problem of continuity. In fact, art money was given to the latest trend, so it's always started something and then it dropped something. And I mean, there was a problem, in fact, of older pioneers, for example. I mean, why shouldn't they get money after developing something? Why should it just be always new things? And I agree with you entirely.
I think it's really a question of just integrate. I mean, the choices I've tried to make are just integrating the idea of making art as not being this odd thing, this other thing. It's just like everybody should just be doing it, and let's get as many people as possible, to do it, and give them a lot of slack. Basically, yeah.